She had been gone for 3 long years. When she stepped out of the taxi and saw the familiar old street again, her heart beat faster. Everything looked the same. The tall trees, the little cafe at the corner, and the huge mansion that stood proudly at the end of the lane. That mansion used to be her second home once. At 21, she had come back home after finishing her studies abroad. She had missed her best friend, missed the laughter and the small-town peace. But deep down, she knew there was another reason her heart was racing, a reason she didn't want to admit even to herself. When the mansion's gate opened, she saw him. He was standing near the car porch talking to someone on the phone. The years had made him even more graceful, his presence calm but commanding. His hair had a few silver strands now, and his voice was deeper. He looked like someone who carried 1,000 stories behind his eyes. He turned, and their eyes met. For a moment, the world felt still. The same warmth she remembered from her teenage years was still there in his eyes. The kindness, the strength, and that little hint of sadness he never showed anyone. She smiled, trying to act normal. "It's been a long time, Mr. Hart," she said softly. He smiled back, a gentle, knowing smile. "Welcome home," he said. His voice carried that quiet affection she had missed for so long. Inside the mansion, everything looked just as it used to, elegant, peaceful, but a little colder without the laughter of his late wife. Memories filled the rooms. She remembered being there as a teenager, sitting with her best friend on the couch, laughing about silly things while Mr. Hart read his newspaper quietly nearby. Back then, he was just her friend's father, someone she admired and respected deeply. Now, everything felt different. Her best friend Laya came running down the stairs, hugging her tightly. "Finally." "You're back," Laya laughed. The house filled with warmth again. They spent hours catching up, talking about everything, life, studies, the people they used to know. But even while laughing, she couldn't stop herself from noticing him whenever he passed by, quietly listening to their voices, that faint smile never leaving his face. That evening, during dinner, she sat across from him. He looked tired, maybe from work. He was a billionaire CEO, powerful, respected, and always composed. But she noticed the way he relaxed at home, the way his voice softened when he talked to Laya, or when he asked her about her studies. "So, you're finally done with university," he said, his tone calm but curious. "Yes," she said. "Feels good to be back. I missed this place." He nodded slowly as if he understood more than she said. "It's good to have you home. This house was too quiet without you two." She smiled, and for the first time that evening, their eyes met again. There was something gentle in his gaze, something that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she stepped out into the garden. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. She stood there silently, lost in her thoughts. It felt strange, how life could change so much, yet certain feelings could appear out of nowhere. She didn't understand why her chest felt heavy when she thought about him. Maybe it was just admiration. Maybe it was something she shouldn't even think about. She was about to go back inside when she heard footsteps. He was there, holding a cup of tea, looking at the stars just like her. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Jet lag, I guess?" He smiled a little. "The stars look the same as always," he said. "No matter how far we go, some things never change." She looked up at the sky again, then back at him. "Yes," she whispered. "Some things don't." They stood there quietly, side by side. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the night air. It wasn't awkward. It felt peaceful, familiar, safe. After a few minutes, he said, "It's late. You should rest." She nodded, but before she could turn away, he said something that made her heart stop for a second. "It's really good to see you again," he said, his voice low and sincere. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't know what to say. She just smiled, a small, warm smile, and walked back inside. When she lay down in bed that night, she couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in her mind. "It's really good to see you again." She told herself it was nothing, that she was just overthinking. But deep inside, she knew something had changed. quietly, softly, like a seed planted in the dark. Something that might grow into something beautiful or dangerous. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the big windows of the guest room. She woke up to the soft sounds of birds outside and the smell of coffee from the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot where she was, but then she remembered. She was back in the Hart mansion, back to the place that once felt like home. She stretched and smiled to herself, trying to shake off the strange feelings from last night. It had been so peaceful, standing under the stars beside him. But she reminded herself again, he was her best friend's father. That line was not to be crossed. Downstairs, the house was already busy. Lila was on the phone, laughing about something. Mr. Hart, Donovan, was sitting at the breakfast table reading the newspaper. He looked calm, focused, and somehow distant. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound casual. He looked up from the paper, his expression softening instantly. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, I did." "Thank you." He nodded and went back to reading. But for some reason, her heart wouldn't stop racing. There was something about the way his voice sounded early in the morning, deep and warm, like it carried comfort in it. While they ate breakfast, Lila talked nonstop, telling stories about her college life, her travels, and the people she met. She and Donovan listened quietly. Every now and then, he'd glance at her, almost unconsciously, as if checking if she was still there. Later that afternoon, Lila left for a quick meeting in town. That left her alone in the house with him. She didn't plan it that way, but it just happened. She was in the living room, flipping through an old photo album she found on the shelf. The pictures brought back memories, the summer pool parties, the birthdays, the family dinners. She smiled, seeing her younger self laughing beside Lila, but then she saw one photo that made her stop. It was from one of those summers. She was about 16, wearing a white dress, standing between Lila and her father. He had his hand gently on her shoulder, smiling at the camera. She remembered that day clearly, the way he had complimented her dress, the first time she had blushed without knowing why. Old memories? His voice came from behind her, soft and low. She turned quickly, a bit startled. He was standing near the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her. "Yes," she said with a small smile. "You used to take all these pictures." He nodded, walking closer. "Your smile hasn't changed," he said quietly. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. She looked at him. Tall, composed, yet his eyes had a softness that could melt anyone's guard. "You've grown up," he continued, his voice calm but thoughtful. "But you still have that same light about you." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. The air between them felt different, warmer, heavier somehow. "I guess time changes everything," she said, looking down. He smiled faintly. "Not everything," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the sound of the wind brushing against the curtains. Then he said, "Lila mentioned you're looking for work now that you're back?" She nodded, grateful for the change in topic. "Yes, I want to do something meaningful. Maybe something related to charity or helping people. I don't want to rush into just anything." He seemed impressed. "That's a good choice. You've always had a kind heart." His words made her chest tighten again. There was a sincerity in the way he said it, as if he truly meant it. He then added, "I might know a few organizations that could use someone like you. If you'd like, I can make some calls." "That would be great," she said softly. "Thank you." He nodded once and gave a small smile before walking away. But even after he left, she kept thinking about his words, the way he looked at her, the quiet warmth in his eyes. That evening, the sky turned orange and pink. She stood by the balcony, watching the sunset. The world looked peaceful again, yet her heart wasn't. Donovan came up behind her quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might like one," he said. She turned, smiling. "Thank you. You still remember I love tea at this hour?" "I remember more than you think," he said, handing her the cup. They both stood there, watching the colors fade into night. There was something soothing about the moment. No words, no expectations, just quiet understanding. After a long pause, he spoke. You know, sometimes life brings people back for a reason. She looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He smiled gently. Maybe to remind us of things we forgot, or to teach us something we weren't ready to learn before. His words lingered in the air like a secret. She didn't reply. She just looked at him, realizing that somewhere between memories and time, her heart had started to notice him in a way it never should have. When he finally walked away, she stood there, her heart full and confused. The night was quiet again, but inside her something had begun. Something she could no longer pretend not to feel. Days passed quietly after that. She started feeling more at home again, spending time with Lila, helping around the house, and enjoying the calm pace of life she had missed for years. But no matter how busy her days were, she always felt his presence somewhere nearby. In the sound of his footsteps down the hall, the low tone of his voice during meetings, the way he would pause for a second whenever their eyes met. One morning, while she was sitting in the garden reading, Donovan walked over holding his phone and a small folder. I was thinking about what you said, he began. About doing something meaningful. She looked up, curious. There's a charity event this weekend, he continued. One of our companies sponsors it every year. It helps children who can't afford school supplies. You could help manage it if you're interested. Her eyes lit up. Really, I'd love to, he smiled slightly. Good. I'll send you the details. That weekend came sooner than she expected. The event was held in a large hall filled with laughter, colors, and music. Dozens of children ran around happily, holding their new books and toys. She helped organize tables, talked with families, and made sure everything went smoothly. Every time she looked across the hall, she saw Donovan, dressed in a simple shirt and blazer, greeting people, helping the staff, even kneeling down to talk with kids. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, gentle, humble, and deeply human. When the event ended, the hall was quiet, except for a few volunteers cleaning up. She was arranging boxes when he came to help. You did well today, he said, placing a box beside her. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It was such a nice day. Seeing all those kids happy made it worth it. He looked at her for a moment, his gaze soft. You have a way of making people feel at ease, he said quietly. Even I feel calmer when you're around. Her hands froze for a second. His words weren't meant to be romantic, and maybe, but they made her heart flutter anyway. Maybe that's because you never stop working, she teased. Trying to lighten the moment, he laughed softly, the sound low and warm. Maybe you're right. They worked in silence for a few minutes. The air between them felt easy, familiar, but something unspoken lingered beneath every glance, every smile. Later that evening, when they returned home, Lila was already asleep. The house was quiet. She went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and found him there too. You should rest, he said, leaning against the counter. You've done enough for one day, she smiled. I could say the same to you, he chuckled. Fair point. For a while, they just stood there. Two people sharing silence that didn't need words. It wasn't planned, it wasn't awkward. It just felt right. Then gently he said, You remind me of someone. She tilted her head. Who? My late wife, he said softly. She had the same kindness, the same way of seeing good in everything. I used to think no one could ever make this house feel alive again. But you did. Her heart ached at his words. There was so much emotion behind them, grief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. I didn't mean to, she whispered. He smiled faintly. I know. The next few seconds stretched into silence. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. There was no sound, no movement, only the quiet pull between them. She stepped back slightly, her chest tight. I should go to bed, she said softly. He nodded, but his eyes followed her as she walked away. Good night, he murmured. She didn't look back. But in her room, as she closed the door, she leaned against it, heart pounding. She didn't understand what was happening. Or maybe she did, but didn't want to admit it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about his words, his voice, the way he looked at her like she mattered. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was something deeper, something that scared her. The next morning, she avoided him as much as possible. But life had other plans. In the afternoon, it started raining. She was sitting by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, when he walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might like some company," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure." He sat beside her, the rain tapping softly against the windows. "I used to love this weather," she said. "It always made me feel calm." "Me too," he replied. "Though lately it feels a little lonely." She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. He didn't look like the strong, untouchable CEO at that moment. He looked human. A man who had lost and learned, who still carried pain but hid it behind calm eyes. "You're not alone," she said quietly. He turned toward her, his expression gentle. "Maybe not," he said, almost in a whisper. They sat there side by side, watching the rain, 2 souls silently realizing that something inside them was changing, something that couldn't be ignored forever. Days turned into weeks, and the air between Elena and Donovan changed, gently, quietly, like a secret whispered in the dark. They didn't speak about what was happening, but both felt it. The way their eyes found each other across a crowded room, the way silence felt comfortable when they were alone. It all said what words couldn't. She tried to fight it. Every night she told herself it was wrong. He was her best friend's father, a man much older, a man who had already lived a life full of love and loss. But the heart rarely listens to reason. One evening, the mansion was quieter than usual. Lila had gone to visit a friend for the weekend, leaving only the 2 of them at home. Elena tried to keep busy, reading, cooking, walking through the garden. But no matter where she went, her thoughts drifted back to him. Later that night, she found herself in the kitchen, unable to sleep. The clock showed nearly midnight. She was making tea when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're awake too," Donovan said softly. She turned, startled, but smiled lightly. "I couldn't sleep. Maybe too much coffee today." He nodded, walking closer. "Me neither. I was going through some reports, but my mind refused to focus." She handed him a cup of tea. "Then maybe this will help." He took it, their fingers brushing briefly, just enough to send a quiet spark through both of them. Neither spoke for a few seconds. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. Full of things they wanted to say, but couldn't. They sat at the small kitchen table. The warm glow from the lamp fell softly across his face, showing the tired lines near his eyes, lines that told stories of long days and lonely nights. "You work too much," she said quietly. "You need to rest sometimes," he smiled faintly. "When you've built something your whole life, it's hard to slow down. But lately," he paused, then looked at her. "Lately, I've realized peace doesn't always come from success." She met his gaze, her heart beating faster. "Where does it come from, then?" He smiled gently. "Sometimes from the people who walk into your life unexpectedly and make it feel alive again." Her breath caught. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. She looked away quickly, pretending to sip her tea. The rain started outside, slow, steady drops against the window. The sound filled the silence between them. She whispered, "You shouldn't say things like that." He looked down, his voice low. "I know, but I can't always stop what I feel." Her heart trembled. She stood up suddenly, walking to the window. "We can't," she said softly. "You know that, right?" "We can't." "I know," he said again. "But knowing doesn't always make it easier." She turned to face him. "Lila looks up to you. She trusts both of us. If she ever," he interrupted gently, "I'd never do anything to hurt her." "Or you." His sincerity broke her guard. For a moment, she wished things were different, that love didn't have rules, that hearts could choose freely without hurting anyone. But life wasn't that kind. The next few days, she tried to distance herself. She spent more time outside, joined community activities, and avoided being alone with him. But it was impossible to erase the quiet connection that had already taken root. Sometimes, when she laughed with Lila, she'd catch him watching from afar, not with guilt or desire, but with something deeper. Something that said he cared. One afternoon, she was helping arrange flowers for a dinner party when Lila suddenly asked, "Do you think my dad will ever remarry?" The question hit her like a wave. I don't know, she said, trying to sound casual. Lila shrugged. He deserves to be happy, but he's so closed off. It's like he locked that part of his heart away. Elena smiled faintly. Maybe he's just waiting for the right reason to open it again. Lila nodded, not noticing how Elena's hands trembled slightly as she arranged the vase. That night, after the guests had left and the mansion grew quiet again, Elena stepped outside. The garden glowed under the moonlight. She needed air, needed space to think. A moment later, she heard his voice behind her. "You always come here when you're lost in thought." She turned, startled but not surprised. "It's peaceful here," she said. He walked closer, stopping beside her. "You've brought peace back into this house, Elena. I didn't realize how empty it was until you came back." She looked at him, her eyes soft but sad. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered again, though this time her voice was weaker. He smiled gently, a hint of pain in his eyes. "Maybe I shouldn't, but I've spent years keeping everything inside, the grief, the loneliness, and now that I finally feel something again, it's hard to hide it." Her heart ached. "Donovan, please." He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop, and I will." She stood there frozen. The night wind brushed her hair and the world seemed to fade. She wanted to speak, but her words wouldn't come. Her silence said everything. He didn't touch her. He just stood there close enough for her to feel his warmth. Then quietly, he said, "Good night," and walked away. She closed her eyes, her chest tight. She knew they were both standing at the edge of something dangerous, something beautiful and wrong all at once. And as she looked up at the stars, one thought filled her heart. Love isn't always pure or planned. Sometimes it's just real. The days that followed were heavy with silence. What had once been soft glances and hidden smiles had turned into stolen moments filled with fear. Elena knew what was happening was wrong. At least that's what her mind said. But her heart wouldn't listen. The evening it all changed began quietly. The air was cool, the sky turning gold as the sun slipped away. Donovan had invited her to help with some documents for the charity project in his study. She told herself it was nothing, just work. But when she walked into that quiet room, her pulse betrayed her. He looked up from his desk, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I needed help finishing the reports before tomorrow." "No problem," she replied, trying to sound calm. But her hands trembled as she took the chair beside him. For a while, they worked in silence. The only sounds were the soft clicking of the pen and the gentle tapping of rain outside. At one point, she leaned over to hand him a paper, and their hands brushed. It was a small touch, barely anything. But both of them froze. Their eyes met. The air changed. He whispered, "Elena," but didn't finish. She looked down, her voice shaking. "We shouldn't—" "I know," he said quietly. But he didn't move away. It wasn't planned. Just a moment where emotions broke through walls they had built for too long. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. She closed her eyes. It wasn't a kiss or a confession, just a touch filled with everything they couldn't say. Love, longing, fear. Then suddenly, the door opened. "Dad?" The sound of Lila's voice froze them both. Elena turned instantly, stepping back, her face pale. Donovan stood, his expression stunned. Lila stood at the door, confusion written all over her face. "What's going on?" she asked, looking from her father to Elena. "Why do you look like that?" Nothing," Elena said quickly, her voice breaking. "We were just working." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Working? At this hour? Alone?" Her voice rose. "What is this?" Donovan stepped forward calmly. "Lila, no!" she snapped. "Don't lie to me." "I can see it." The way you look at each other. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. It's not what you think, then what is it? Lila shouted. Tell me! The silence that followed was unbearable. Donovan's face was filled with guilt. Elena couldn't speak. Lila's voice cracked. You're my best friend, Elena, and you... She pointed at her father. You're supposed to be my father. How could you both do this? Elena tried to reach her. Lila, please, don't, Lila said, stepping back. Her eyes were full of betrayal and hurt. Just don't. I don't want to hear another word. She turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The house fell into silence again. Only the sound of the rain outside filled the air. Elena stood frozen, tears rolling down her cheeks. I've ruined everything, she whispered. Donovan's voice was heavy. No, I should have stopped this before it went this far. This is on me. She shook her head. It's not your fault alone. I should have left when I felt this happening. He stepped closer, his voice low and full of pain. Don't say that. You didn't do anything wrong by feeling. We just chose the wrong time. She couldn't look at him. Her heart was breaking. I can't stay here anymore. Elena. She turned away. I have to go, Donovan, for her. For you. He didn't try to stop her. Maybe because he knew she was right. The next morning, the mansion was cold and quiet. Lila refused to come out of her room. Elena packed her things silently. Every corner of the house felt heavy with memories, laughter, comfort, stolen glances that now hurt too much to remember. When she stepped out of the front door, Donovan was waiting near the car. His eyes were tired, his face pale from sleeplessness. I didn't want you to leave like this, he said quietly. She forced a small smile. Some things don't end the way we want. But maybe they end the way they must. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. I never meant to hurt anyone. I know, she said. And I'll never regret meeting you. But I think it's time we both learn to let go. He took a deep breath, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. It's for you. Don't open it now, just when you're ready. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she got into the car, he said softly, Take care of yourself. She looked back at him one last time. The man she shouldn't have loved, yet couldn't stop loving. When the car drove away, tears blurred her vision. The mansion grew smaller in the distance until it disappeared completely. She opened the envelope later that night in her hotel room. Inside was a simple note written in his handwriting. Some loves are not meant to last in the light, but they still live forever in the heart. She pressed the note to her chest, tears falling silently. That night, for the first time, she didn't dream of him. She just felt the ache of missing something that could never be. Years passed, but time didn't erase everything. Some memories stayed, like soft echoes that refused to fade. Elena had built a new life in the city. She found a small apartment near the sea where the sound of waves became her daily comfort. She worked with a nonprofit organization that helped young girls get education, something she had always wanted to do. Her life was simple, quiet, and peaceful, at least on the surface. But sometimes, when the evenings were too still, she would catch herself thinking about him. The way his voice used to sound when he said her name, the calm strength in his eyes, the note he had given her before she left. She still kept that note tucked carefully in her diary, old, folded, but never forgotten. People often said time healed everything. Maybe it did, but not completely. Some wounds didn't close. They just learned to stop bleeding. One rainy afternoon, she was helping organize donations at the office when her boss walked in with a letter. A company just made a big donation, he said, smiling. We can finally open that new learning center. That's wonderful, she said, genuinely happy. He handed her the envelope. Here, you should see this. The donor asked to remain anonymous, but they wanted you to have a copy of the thank you note. She opened the letter. Inside it said, in support of education for those who need it most. Let this bring hope where it once was lost. There was no name. But she recognized the handwriting instantly. Her breath caught. She touched the paper gently, her heart racing. It had been years. She hadn't seen him, hadn't heard his voice, but he had found her. Quietly, from afar, he was still watching over her. That night, she sat by her window, listening to the rain. She whispered to herself, "You still care?" and smiled through tears. Somewhere across the city, Donovan sat alone in his office. The years had changed him, too. His hair had grown grayer, his face a little older, but his eyes still carried the same warmth. His company had grown even more successful, but the emptiness inside hadn't left. He had respected her decision to go. It was the right thing, well, maybe the only thing. But there wasn't a single day he didn't think of her. He often checked the foundation reports, quietly following her work. Every project she started, every success she earned, he felt proud, like watching a light that once shone in his home now brighten the world. One evening, Lila came to visit him. They hadn't spoken much about the past. The topic had always been quietly avoided, tucked away like an old wound that still hurt. "Dad," Lila said gently as they sat in the living room, "I saw something today. There was an article online about a charity event. Elena was there. She looks happy." He looked up slowly. "She does?" Lila nodded. "Yes, I think she's doing really well." He smiled softly, but his eyes glistened. "She always had a good heart." Lila hesitated before speaking again. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted. "But I've grown up now. I understand things differently. Maybe what happened wasn't right, but maybe it wasn't entirely wrong either." He looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to say that." "I want to," she said quietly. "You lost so much after Mom. Maybe you just needed to feel something again. And she always brought light into people's lives. I just wish I had seen that back then." For the first time in years, something inside him eased. "Thank you, Lila," he said softly. After she left that night, Donovan went to his study and opened a drawer. Inside was a small box. He lifted the lid and took out a photo, a picture from years ago of the three of them laughing at a garden picnic. Elena's smile was bright, full of life. He placed the picture on his desk, staring at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "I hope you're happy, wherever you are." Meanwhile, miles away, Elena was standing by the shore. The wind played with her hair, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. She felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when you stop running from your heart. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel him there, the same calm presence, the same quiet strength. Maybe they would never see each other again. Maybe their story had ended long ago. But some love stories didn't need an ending. They just lived on silently, like the tide that keeps returning to the shore. And somewhere deep inside, she knew. One day, fate would bring them face to face again. 5 years later, the city was alive with lights and music. The annual charity gala was being held at one of the most beautiful hotels downtown. It was a night of celebration, a night to honor people who had changed lives through kindness. Elena had been invited as one of the key guests. Her foundation had grown beyond anything she ever dreamed. Hundreds of children had received education and care because of her efforts. As she walked through the hall in a soft ivory gown, people greeted her with admiration and respect. She smiled politely, but inside, her heart was calm, a quiet kind of peace she had earned through years of healing. Still, a small part of her heart ached, a part that still remembered a pair of kind eyes and a gentle voice that once said, "It's really good to see you again." She took a deep breath and focused on the evening. It wasn't about the past. It was about everything she had built since then. The host began announcing the special guests. When the next name echoed through the hall, Elena froze. "Tonight, we also welcome Mr. Donovan Hart, founder of the Hart Group and one of our most generous donors." Her heart stopped for a moment. She turned slowly. There he was, walking through the crowd, calm as ever, dressed in a dark suit. His hair had more silver now, but his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed at all. The room seemed to fade around her. It had been years, yet in that single moment, all the years disappeared. He saw her too. For a second, he looked almost unsure if what he was seeing was real. Then their eyes met fully, and both knew. Later in the evening, after the speeches and applause, she stepped out to the balcony for some air. The night sky sparkled above, the soft sound of music drifting from inside. "Still love quiet corners, don't you?" a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned. He was standing there, smiling gently. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said softly. "Neither did I," he replied, "but life has a strange way of circling back." They stood in silence for a moment, just looking at each other, two people who had once shared something too deep to forget. "You look well," he said. "You've done incredible things, Elena. The world talks about you now." She smiled faintly. "I just followed what I believed in." He nodded. "I always knew you would." The wind played gently with her hair as she looked up at him. "You kept your promise?" she whispered. He frowned slightly. "What promise?" "That I'd never be alone," she said. "I know about the donations. The letters. You helped the foundation quietly all these years, didn't you?" He hesitated, then gave a small smile. "I only wanted you to have what you deserved." "You've made me proud." Her eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't have to do that, Donovan." "I wanted to," he said. "It was never about obligation. It was always about you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence said everything. The years apart, the pain, the love that never really went away. Finally, she said softly, "You know, I used to think what we had was a mistake. But now I see it differently. Maybe it wasn't wrong. Maybe it was just too early." He looked at her, his eyes shining with the same warmth she remembered. "Maybe now it's not too late." She smiled through tears. "You really think so?" He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "I've waited for you, Elena. Not in hope, just in faith. Because deep down, I always believed you'd come back into my life somehow." Her chest tightened. The years, the distance, the guilt, all of it melted away in that moment. All that remained was what had always been there. Love. "Quiet, patient, unbroken," she whispered. "I missed you." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "I missed you too. Every single day." The city lights reflected in her eyes as she looked up at him. Around them, laughter and music filled the air, but for them, the world had gone still again, just like that night years ago in the garden under the stars. This time, there were no walls between them. No secrets, no fears. He smiled softly. "May I have this dance?" She nodded, and he led her back inside. The music slowed. A gentle tune filled with warmth and memory. As they moved together, it felt as if time itself had paused to give them another chance. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly. "Every day," he replied, but not with regret. "Because it brought me here. To you." Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. "Then maybe it was all meant to happen exactly this way," he smiled. Maybe it was. When the song ended, he looked into her eyes and said, "I waited for you." And she whispered back, tears glistening in her eyes, "You always knew I would come back." The crowd clapped softly as they stood there, still holding each other, not as a secret anymore, but as two souls who had finally found peace. Outside, the night wind carried the sound of laughter and music into the stars. And somewhere in that moment, their story, once forbidden, once broken, finally found its quiet, beautiful ending.